Okay, I think we're going to begin. So may I have everybody sit down? We're about to begin the second session, so can I ask you to be seated? Okay, please take your seats now. We're about to begin the session. Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joel Migdal, and I've been asked to chair this second session of today. And let me introduce all the speakers that we're going to hear in this session. We're going to have four speakers. The first will be Raphael Cohen-Almagor, who you've heard before. He received his doctorate from the University of Oxford. He is chair in politics, founding director of the Middle East Center at the University of Hull, and he's a fellow this year at the Institute here for Advanced Study. And importantly, the president of the Association for Israel Studies. He's the author of many, many publications. I'll just mention one or two. Confronting the Internet's Dark Side in 2015, Just Reasonable Multiculturalism in 2021, and The Republic, Secularism and Security, France versus the Burqa and the Nikah in 2022. Our second speaker will be Dr. Ameer Fakhoury, who is a Polanski postdoctoral fellow at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, where I spend most of my days. He is a lawyer, publicist, and political and cultural sociologist at the Van Leer Institute. He is the co-director of the Nissan Project for the Study of Shared Society, which aims to establish the study of shared society as an academic field. And he does many, many other things, including a member of the advisory board of Accord, a consultant for shared society organizations, and the former director of the Human Rights Lawyers Community and its research unit at the School for Peace in Neve Shalom. Dr. Fakhira Halloun worked for 2 years at the Office of the United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East, where she designed the UN strategies on engaging with Israeli and Palestinian civil society organizations, leading to peace-building efforts. She led the establishment of the first network for reconciliation and forgiveness in the Arab region and managed its activities over the first year through her work at the Salam Institute for Peace and Justice based in Washington, D.C. Since 2021, Fakhira has been a member of a think tank group at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, developing principles on partnership-based peace for solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And the final speaker will be Asa Kasher, professor of Emeritus of Professional Ethics and Philosophy and Senior Research at INSS, the Security Institute in Tel Aviv University. He's won the Israel Prize for Philosophy and is the author of numerous books, papers, and ethical codes. He's also the editor-in-chief of the Hebrew Encyclopedia, second edition, which is in process. So we'll start by having Rafi come up. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I would like to speak about the prospects for peace following the October 7th attack. How I designed this lecture, I'll speak a bit about my peace research, so you know the context where I'm coming from and what I'm doing. I will explain what are the basic premises of my research. I'll discuss some of the main lessons of October 7th, and then I'm going to outline the short-term and long-term impacts of the attack. I'll explain the preconditions for peace and the concept of ripeness that I think is very, very important. And I will present the underpinning principles of any solution to the conflict. And I think that these include the concept of justice, conflict resolution, negotiations, mediation, facilitation, the concept of compromise, the concept of what I call super forecasting. And finally, I'm going to briefly present what I perceive to be the long-term solution to the conflict. So let me start by saying a bit about my research. I've been a peace activist since the 1980s. I've been working in two parties in Israel. And this is when I started to speak with Palestinians, because Jews and Arabs don't often meet on equal basis, unfortunately. And one has to strive to meet them on equal basis, and that's what I've done. I've tried to meet Arabs and speak to them. In the late 90s, I supported the Gaza First idea, and I've been supporting two-state solution for many, many years. In 2013, I decided to merge my peace activities that never cease. I continued to meet with Palestinians and to search for peace. To merge my peace activities with my academic life. And I decided to write a book on resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which was timely, still timely. It will going to be timely for some time. And I don't like to use secondary sources very much. All my books, my major books, all of them are based on primary sources, though this one is no exception. So I try to write books that you cannot read anywhere else. I'm not just a collecting of others people's material. I don't like doing that. I like to write my own stuff. So this book is based on two main primary sources. I went to archives and looked at documents in Jerusalem, London, Washington, and Oslo. And I've been conducting semi-structured interviews, 19 interviews until now, still counting. I have another interview coming up this week with people who were involved in some capacity or another in the peace process. And I interviewed presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, deputy prime ministers like Dan Meridor, royalties and others, senior diplomats and senior politicians, from Israel, the Palestinian Authority, Norway, Sweden, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Kingdom, United States, and United Nations. It's a major undertaking. And each interview is, I think the mean is about 2 hours or 2.5 hours. So I've been sitting with people and talk about prospects for peace for many long hours. It's the major project of my life. The basic premises of this project are the following. I strongly believe that Israel's survival depends on its integration into the Middle East. For many, many years, our George Washington, David Ben-Gurion, says that the last thing that we want is to be part of this jungle. He wanted us to be a villa in the jungle. I think it's a mistake. If Israel aims to be a villa in the jungle, we'll never be accepted in this jungle. So we need to find a way into the Middle East. And the sooner that we find a way to the Middle East, the chances for us as a nation to survive would be greater. And I believe that the key to Israeli integration into the Middle East is to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As long as the conflict is alive, is not resolved, they are not going to accept us. We are not like a conflict between Sudan and South Sudan. We are far from that. We are in the heart of the Arab world. And when we are seeking about solution, the solution must be just. It cannot be one-sided. It cannot be coerced. It cannot only be just for one side at the expense of the other. if that will be the case, it's not going to survive. I also argue that peace is a precious commodity, and therefore it requires both parties to pay a high price for its achievement. Just show me one precious commodity that doesn't come with a price. So we need to reach a solution that is agreeable to both sides. The peace deal should be attractive to both Israel and Palestine equally, and as I said, it cannot be enforced. To resolve the conflict, there is a need to have courageous leaders, and Dan spoke about leadership and the importance of leadership on both sides, who seize the opportunities presented to them and make the most for the peoples. What are the lessons of October 7th? One thing that puzzled me when I spoke with prime ministers and security people, especially from Israel, but also from Palestine, I always asked them, how do you deal with spoilers? That was a constant question in all my lectures, in all my interviews. And what puzzled me is they said, all of them, with almost no exception, and almost the same sentence. It's like there's a mantra, especially among the Israelis. There will always be spoilers. We'll have to deal with them. That was the answer. And for me, this is simply not good enough. It's not a good enough answer because spoilers do spoil. And they spoil greatly. You know, I remember Rabin and Peres, who used to say that we are going to continue the peace process as if there's no terrorism, and we are going to fight terrorists as if no peace process. This is ridiculous. I always found this ridiculous. It's a ridiculous mantra, because these are the same people. If you can't go out of your home, take a bus, or go into the kindergarten, or go into the supermarket, or going to have coffee without fear, if you cannot do that, then peace loses any charm. Why should you find peace attractive? So you can continue the peace process, but in a long way you're going to lose the people. So we need to address the issue of spoilers. People ask me, what 7th of October actually changed in your research? Because I've started my research in 2013. Well, actually not very, very much. Because I always insisted that there cannot be one solution for the West Bank under the PLO and the same solution for Gaza under Hamas. Because I'm taking the spoilers very, very seriously. And October 7th spoiled more than any other terrorist event. And it might derail the peace process for years to come as a result. We simply don't have any appetite nowadays for peace. Second lesson is the end of divide and rule. For many years, and especially the current Prime Minister of Israel, believed that he can play a game between the PLO and Hamas. At one point, he's going to encourage one, at another point, he's going to sponsor another. They are going to fight, and the beneficiary is going to be Israel. That's the end of that. I don't think that the game is going to continue. I think that Netanyahu realized that he cannot play this game anymore. And Gaza needs to be rebuilt. I mean, Israel is excellent in destroying. We've done excellent work in destroying Gaza. But now, or soon, there'll be come to rebuild Gaza. I don't think that Israel can do it alone. I think that we are going to have help. But Israel has a vested interest to see that Gaza is rebuilt. Because otherwise, it will just stay there and lingers like an open wound. And that's not something that we want. Third lesson is that we need separate solutions for the West Bank and Gaza. This is as long as there's no ruler in Gaza that is willing to commit to some sort of reconciliation with Israel. As long as this is the case, then if we want to advance with any kind of reconciliation with the Palestinians, we need first to do it in the West Bank and then to think or rethink about Gaza. And lastly, we need to address the root causes of the conflict. That's the elephant in the room. It cannot just stay there untouched. We need to address the elephant in the room. We have to address the root causes of the conflict. What are the short-term impacts of 7 October? So I mentioned that there's a need to rebuild Gaza and to install a new order. There's a need to involve the Arab countries for two practical reasons. One, they can't do it, 5 minutes, they can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. And secondly, they are also interested in doing that. We need to renew constructive cooperation with the Palestinian Authority. There is cooperation, continued cooperation on security, but we have to deepen this cooperation also to other fields. We need to marginalize Hamas and dismantle its arms completely. And we should aim to include Hamas in the PLO under certain conditions and with the consent and, of course, approval of the PLO. We want to see that there is some sort of unitary party over the Palestinians. The long-term impact of 7 October is that we need to break the vicious cycle of violence. If you look at the history of Israel, oftentimes I'm asked to speak about the history of Israel, and I find myself speaking about 47, 48, 56, 67, 73, 82, Intifada, 2082, 2006, and now endless skirmishes and confrontation with Hamas. This needs to be stopped. It's abnormal reality. We are living here in Israel, abnormal life. We have to find a better future for our children, for our grandchildren. I want to see Palestinian children and Jewish children playing together rather than fighting each other. We need to resolve the conflict. What are the preconditions for peace? Leaders in Israel and Palestine who are committed to peace, perceive peace as strategy rather than tactics, and willing to pay the price for peace. We need to have them. If there's only one leader, then there won't be any peace. It will be impossible. So both leaders should understand there is a price to pay. Both leaders should be ready to pay the price. And both leaders should be capable to deliver. If they just have goodwill and unable to lead the people towards peace, then again, there won't be any peace. Another precondition has to do with the circumstances, and this is where I come to the concept of ripeness. Ripeness is about two factors: mutually hurting stalemate and having a way out. Establishing that peace would be beneficial to both of us, realizing that that's something that is going to be beneficial to both of us, and therefore a desired goal. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, by time is ripe, it is meant that both leaders believe that enough blood was shed, that they need to seize the moment because things might worsen for the people, and that they can lead their respective people to accept the peace agreement and change reality for the better. The underpinning principles of my research and of my project are the following. I don't have much time, although, Joel, you can allow us a few more minutes because I think Asa Kasher is not coming. So maybe each of us can speak for 20 minutes rather than 15. The first principle is justice. I'm a Rawlsian. I don't know how many of you in this hall know Rawls, John Rawls, but I'm a Rawlsian. And when I come into judgment about justice, I always try to put myself above the veil of ignorance. Because if you put yourself behind the veil of ignorance, then religion doesn't matter, nationality doesn't matter, race doesn't matter, gender doesn't matter, your ethnic group doesn't matter. Justice is justice for all. It doesn't have any color, it doesn't have any creed, it doesn't have any race. And if you want to opt for justice, this is the starting point for you to understand what you want to have. I also explain what is conflict resolution and what are the keys for successful negotiations, mediation, and facilitation. If Israel and Palestine would decide that they need mediation or facilitation, they may decide to negotiate directly. I don't know. I'm not a prophet. Another very important principle is compromise, because I said that both sides have to make concessions. So the principle of compromise is very, very important. And lastly, super forecasting is a concept that Gardner and Tetlock presented to us back in 2015, in which they spoke about the ideal decision maker, the ideal deal broker. And they spoke about people that have dragon eye vision of society. They know how to map the alternatives. They know where they want to go, and they know how to get there. They know how to make the calculations, and they know to distinguish between the periphery and the important, and to stick to the important. They are emotionally cognizant, they are analytic, and they know how to reach the ends. So I'm using the concept of super forecasting also in my book. What is the long-term solution? We're speaking about prospects for peace after October 7th. And I said that we are not Usain Bolt, we are not running 100-meter run. It's a marathon. So we have to be patient. And we have to pick the right time. I spoke about ripeness in a minute. We have to pick the right time. Even if we have two leaders who are committed to peace and willing to pay the price and know how to lead the people, if the circumstances are not ripe, meaning that if they think they gain more somewhere in the distant future or the near future, they are not going to opt for a solution. So when the three preconditions are there, meaning an Israeli leader is willing to pay the price, wants to peace and so on, and Palestinian, and the time is ripeness, only when the three are there, then it's possible to opt out to have a peace. And in my mind, of all the solutions that exist, and I mapped all the solutions in my book, still is the two-state solution is, to me, the most doable, the most viable, and the one that we should have. Otherwise, any other solution would be an unjust solution for one party or another. In the second stage, after two-state solution, to make Palestine more viable with a backbone that could be sustained economically, strategically, militarily, with foreign affairs and so on, I'm opting, or I hope to have Jordanian-Palestinian Confederation. And I spoke with Jordanians, very senior Jordanians, in the Jordanian government, past and present, and none of them rejected the idea. None of them. But all of them said, after two-state solution. Meaning first should we have a viable Palestinian state that exists there, say, for 5 years, and then let's speak about that. Gaza, as long as the situation is as is, cannot be part of the solution at present because they're going to spoil everything. So Gaza may join later, and I'm not going to discard them. We have to treat them, we have to help them, we have to build artificial islands for them, we have to evoke the economy, we have to sustain their leadership with the participation of the Palestinian, I'm going to finish on time, don't worry, with the Palestinian Authority, but it cannot be here and now part of the solution. Gaza should come later. And in the process, we need to involve the Arab countries. Because oftentimes, if you read the proceedings in Camp David and other places, they always said, we can't do this alone. We have the consent and participation of Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco. They also said there's another Arab country there that should be involved, but they were never invited. I asked the Americans, why didn't you invite these Arabs to Camp David and other places? And they said, well, it was too complicated. We had to concentrate on the Palestinians. And I agree, it's a very complicated, it would have made the issue far more complex. In conclusion, the signing of a peace treaty intended to end more than 150 years of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict requires political capital. Writing this milestone chapter in the history of the Israeli and Palestinian people also requires considerable courage. The main key for successful negotiation is to have leaders who are committed to achieving an agreement and willing to take the risks and make the compromises, necessary compromises, to reach an agreement. Thank you very, very much.
Our next speaker is Ameer.
Hello everybody, salam al-jamia, shalom likulam. Okay, so before I start reading from this paper, it's really invigorating to hear such a debate about peace in these times. So I'm really happy to know that a significant part of our Jewish Israeli co-citizens still believe in something else than perpetual conflicts. So it's really fantastic to hear that. And my talk now will be somewhat complementary to what Rafi just said. I will also delve into this question, maybe from a different perspective. Allow me to read from a paper because I really want to stick to the times. So we'll just begin now. Okay, so thank you for this invitation, for important discussion, and again for not hesitating to mention the word peace in times when, sadly, most are speaking of war and perpetual conflict. In my talk, I will address the question of whether the catastrophic episode we are currently experiencing bring the sides closer to peace or reconciliation. And before answering this almost impossible question, I need to clarify 4 preliminary points. First, the discussion about the day after must not escape from the catastrophic reality now unfolding in Gaza. In my opinion, this discussion is justified only if it generates political energy and radical but practical hope for ending the conflict and, most importantly, for saving the people's lives here from this bloody and ongoing nightmare, especially saving the Gazans, Palestinians. So this ought to be interpretive or descriptive question, but a prescriptive one. On the matter, historian and food studies researcher Al-Maigra recently cautioned us it would be wise to stop talking about the day after, or at the very least, to begin the discussion by understanding that the time in Gaza now is a time of hunger. Following the unlawful and brutal Hamas attack on October 7, Israel's current government has opened the gates of hell in Gaza. A hell that will haunt its architects and, in truth, all of us to varying degrees for many years to come. However, I will leave the legal discussion about war crimes to legal experts. Second, I will address meta-theories. That is, in what concerns how we should analyze and theorize analytically and descriptively the relation between Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. Statements such the Israeli and Palestinians are locked in a protracted bloody conflict, or the history of the Palestinian Israel is one of settlement and resistance, or justice and liberation for Palestinians should be prioritized over peace with the Israelis, implicitly rely on meta-theories, using methods derived from these meta-theories to analyze reality, to some extent embeds them within reality itself. These meta-theories can be classified into 4 analytical categories. First, symmetry. Second, asymmetry. Third, relationality. And 4, replica. Symmetry and asymmetry meta-theories assume a moral boundaries between the sides, used to evaluate and morally judge their behavior and statements. Relational meta-theory assume the existence of what I will call a shared experience boundary between the sides, which I will elaborate on later. Replica meta-theory, a unique derivative of relational theory, posits that the action of one side generate almost as a mirror effect, similar action from the other side. Without delving into this complex issue, which is not the focus of my talk, I will simply note that my approach here is relational. This approach typically avoids direct moral judgment of the sides and instead focuses on the ongoing moment of their mutual entanglement and interdependence as an epistemological foundation that could lead to an ethics of reconciliation. Relationality implies that the tight connection between the two nations transcend any abstract framework of comparison. These are two nations inextricably linked, with actions reflect a continuity of both different and similar political logics. The third point, of course, when engaging with such questions, we must remain humble in the face of history, forces, and twists. Less than 2 weeks ago, a dictatorship nearly 60 years old collapsed with 11 days, an outcome no one predicted. The first principle for discussing prediction is thus to acknowledge the inherent limitation of such efforts in the face of history twist, hidden paths, and the unintended consequences of decision made by numerous actors, forces within it. Fourth and final, I will address the concept of peace and reconciliation without delving too deeply into their various meanings. Peace in its thin sense, or thin meaning, means replacing political violence with politics in its broadest sense. Then, this is a thin understanding because it's primarily procedural and functional. Some kind of a commitment to replace Kalashnikov with conversation, F-16 with negotiation between equals. In academic research and public discourse, reconciliation is often linked to peace, justice, and political or diplomatic solution. In his book, When Political Transition Works, Reconciliation as Interdependence, the South African scholar Du Toit offers a pragmatic but incremental understanding of reconciliation. According to his approach, reconciliation begins with recognizing the interdependence between the sides as a first step toward a development and ethics of mutual dependency. In its advanced stage, reconciliation should evolve to include aspects of associated with social and political dimension of reconciliation, if you will, a more thick reconciliation. To address the question, I wish to explore for the prospects of peace and reconciliation following the disaster we are in. I will adopt the thin sense of peace and the pragmatic sense of reconciliation. These understandings bring peace and reconciliation closer together and render them complementary. Having clarified these points, I can proceed to the central question: what are the prospects for peace and reconciliation in the wake of this disaster? To attempt even a preliminary answer to this nearly impossible question, I will draw on the theory of military sociologist Yegiel Levy. In his recent book, Levy offers an interesting theory. In his recent books, Shooting and Crying, Israel New Militarization in the 20s. Levy argues that, based on past experience, three conditions, usually cumulative, can spur a shift toward pursuing peace in its thin sense. These are: first, escalating costs of maintaining the conflict due to external pressure; second, exhaustion of military option; and third, the formation of a credible political alternative. In many ways, Levy echoes the writing of John Hughes on reconciliation in Northern Ireland, where reconciliation was described as a functional imperative. A similar argument is elaborated in Du Toit's book on South Africa, which points that reconciliation there was based on recognition that embraces a shared future on the basis that this is not only desirable but unavoidable. Levy focuses on the stronger side, the occupier, though he indirectly accounts for Palestinian agency within the variable of conflict costs, which could rise due to the Palestinian resistance. However, since I have adopted a relational meta-theory, I proposed adding a variable that directly reflects Palestinian agency. Let us call this variable Palestinian politics, encompassing two aspects: the internal capacity to present a unified national project and the external ability to offer a political agreement that could, in principle, address the fears and national aspirations of the Israeli Jews. Recently, the Palestinian scholar Zrek reminded us of just how difficult the situation in the case before us. In comparison to South Africa, Zrek wrote in this matter, it was the blacks who presented as the formula that allowed the end of the apartheid regime. For Palestinians, it is difficult to present such a formula, at least at this stage and with this intensity. The difficulty stems, among other things, from the reluctance to give up in advance and unnecessary on the just give up in advance and in unnecessary way on the just demands for the right of return, coming back to what Don said. But also because every time the Palestinians try to present a compromising position, Israel hardened its stances, and those who compromise do not receive an outreach hand. In the same regard, we should mention the Ugandan anthropologist Muhammad Mamdani that assert that the Palestinian moment will come if they manage to convince the Jews that equality for all, which will be realized through decolonization by building a shared political community of citizens, is in everyone's interest. This is a statement that could be jarring to Palestinians' ears, to say the least, partly because it deviates from the Fanonic worldview, which Palestinians likely favor, and also because it ignores the asymmetry between the parties. Indeed, it is hard to think of conflicts in terms of greater asymmetry than the one we live in it, but here I have chosen already a relational meta-theory as mentioned. After adding a Palestinian agency to the two variables in Levy's theory, we will return to apply it. Well, I will start with the easier part and move to the more difficult. There is indeed a framework for ending the conflict. In my opinion, it was never really the problem, since the real issue was more about the willingness and political intent to implement a fair and agreed upon plan. אפילו אחרי 5 דקות? אז 8 דקות, מכוח השוויון. Personally, I prefer a partnership-based peace that seeks to establish a confederated two states upon to each other and based on the shared identity ethos. Even if not at the founding stage, maybe later, ethos that is built on a shared identity of sons and daughters of a shared homeland. The second variable I'm taking from Levy and wish to address now is exhaustion of military option, or in other words, recognition of the limits of force. There is a significant chance that the Israeli majority will discover that even after the gates of hell were opened in Gaza, Gaza and the Gazans remain. The Palestinians remain. And between the sea and the river, there are still two almost equally sized nations. Here, it is important to clarify that we are not only talking about reflecting an objective reality, but also about the result of political, cognitive, and ethical framing of these unfolding actions. The violence, for example, of the Hutu against the Tutsi in the Rwanda genocide in the early 1990s could have supported a thesis, ethos, and a justification regime from the genre of forever we will eat the sword. But it instead supported conclusion that were one of the deepest reconciliation we know. This is to say that the conclusion from war, including acknowledgement of limits of force, are also a result of framing and representation of reality, especially those with symbolic power to nominate into existence, as Bourdieu phrased it, will determine how the framing of violence and the consequences of the violence will be perceived by ordinary people. I will continue from here to another variable, the Palestinian variable, in its two parts. I will summarize it to I think that after this catastrophe, the Palestinian politics will be more unified because, as one might expect, Hamas is more weakened and will be more willing to be unified in the PLO. I will quickly address the last variable. Now we are left with the most difficult variable, escalating cost of maintaining the conflict due to external pressure. But I will also consider cost in general, not only cost resulted from external pressure. Some might argue that Israel is as is well known, a regional superpower supported by a global empire. The cost of occupying a people with no really ability to fight back cannot truly harm it. And it has been even triumphed over what is called the excess of evil. My diagnosis here is different. I think after a year of war, the Israeli society is exhausted economically, emotionally, and militarily, with hundreds of dead and thousands wounded. Do not be too impressed by some politicians' words about a time of miracles or decisive victories. Israeli society are also tired and exhausted, and most of them surely do not want to live in a Jewish Sparta. In this respect, Israel is like a heavyweight bodybuilder standing on this thin ice. Indeed, a recent survey by a Cohen-Almagor Institute showed that only 39% of the public in Israel feel hope about the possibility of living safely in Israel, compared to 37% who feel despair. Among opposition voters, only 25 and 56 respectively. Therefore, these political feelings are fertile ground for framing other possibilities for the future. Let me cut that. And finally, now perhaps to the most important environable external pressure. Without external pressure, we will not come close to peace and reconciliation. This is almost a historical rule. It is to be expected that the fact that the conflict has reached such extreme level of violence will encourage the international community to increase its involvement. This is true also regarding to the American empire, but not under Trump's rule, who will likely try to resolve the conflict by undermining Palestinian nationalism, not by seeking reconciliation. I want to conclude this talk with 3 points that, in my opinion, also can help us to answer the question. First, we must talk about doses and blends. For example, a certain dose of external pressure is necessary to motivate a politics of reconciliation, as too much external pressure could encourage a siege mentality among the Jewish majority. Therefore, it's not just a configuration of variables, but a configuration of variables in the right degree. We also need to consider meta-paradigms. After the catastrophic war, it will not be possible to return to the dominant paradigm since the 90s of conflict management. The choice, therefore, is between a paradigm of internal war or resolving the conflict by choosing peace and reconciliation. When these are the choices, we stand at a dangerous and frightening crossroads. But the absence of a somehow convenient option for conflict management strengthens as I seek to convince my assessment of the above variables. The third point I want to conclude with is to highlight and thereby also pave the way for important lecture by my colleague Fakhira, the contribution role of the Palestinians in Israel advancing peace and reconciliation. Every time I want to like to end my talks with the sentence, let us not forget this is a time of catastrophe and we must all work to halt it and above all to insist becoming survivors of the homeland's last disaster. Shukran, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Fakhira.
Thank you for inviting me today. Okay, I will also read in order to keep carefully the language that I am using and also to keep on the time. Over the past 2 decades, I have been examining the identity of Palestinian citizens of Israel. This examination differs from delving into their victimization that resulted from policies of oppression and racism against them since the establishment of the State of Israel. Instead, it focuses on the potential embedded within this identity in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what role Palestinian citizens of Israel can play in advancing the end of the occupation and resolving the long-standing bloody conflict. The discussion of this question is especially necessary now in light of the violent deterioration in relationship between the two people since October 7 and the rise of an atmosphere of hatred, revenge, and dehumanization on both sides. Against this backdrop, Palestinians in Israel have the potential to present an alternative discourse, a moral-centered narrative for both people, one that recognizes their right to live in a shared homeland. This discourse, it challenges the collective Palestinian identity on one hand and the Jewish Zionist identity on other, fostering shared identity line and common values between the two people within a framework of dialogue about a shared future in the homeland. The discussion about the role of Palestinian citizens is also necessary due to the changes in the character of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over the past 2 decades and the right of the far-right ideological wing, combined by intensification of oppression and racist policies against Palestinian citizens and increasing labeling them as internal enemies. All of this pushed Palestinian citizens of Israel to the center of the conflict and to the center of the dynamics between Palestinians and Israelis. Despite the ongoing discriminatory and racist policies against Palestinian citizens since 1948, I want to introduce another line of narrative about them into this discussion, their role as a moral agency for change in the broader context of Israel-Palestine, and not just as a victims. Palestinian citizens are the only group among the other Palestinian groups that engage in the daily multi-dimensional interaction with the Jewish society in Israel. This interaction might be highlighted, and I will rely on it in the argument I will share. The daily interaction between Palestinian citizens with Jewish society under the umbrella of citizenship for the past 76 years, the coalition that have been developed, the interpersonal relationship, professional and economical connection, despite being filled with tension and conflict, have created a complex dynamics that is different from the dynamics of enemies, which existed between Jews in Israel and the other Palestinian groups. This is a dynamic that has created a moral political behavior of Palestinians in Israel toward the Jewish collective and their rights in the homeland, one that cannot be ignored. Despite the deterioration dynamic of the conflict, and despite the fact that the scar of 1948 has not been addressed through political reconciliation processes, despite the ongoing Nakba with the reality of the apartheid in the occupied territories and the war crimes in Gaza, it can be cautiously said that Palestinians in Israel have reconciled in emotional terms with the Jewish collective regarding the presence of the Jews in the homeland. These daily interactions, formed in various circles, led to a moral bond between certain parts in the Palestinian and in the Jewish society in Israel that is stronger than the enmity that the Israeli government's policies have planted throughout its existence. The dynamic between the two people since October 7 are horrifying. Despite the violent colonial control over Palestinians since 1967 and the siege on Gaza since 2007, a Palestinian moral voice is needed regarding the October massacre, a voice that opposes armed resistance and harm to civilians in the name of national liberation. Palestinian politicians and intellectuals from the West Bank, Gaza, and the diaspora, most of whom are overwhelmed with feeling of rage toward Israeli colonial control over Palestinians for the past 50 years, views the October 7 operation as an understandable response to the brutality of Israeli policy toward Palestinians over the last decade. They found it difficult to express a moral opposition to the events. Others were afraid to publicly express a moral voice to opposing due to fears of collective Palestinian criticisms and outrage in light of the war crimes Israel is committing in Gaza following October 7. A moral discourse that opposes harming civilians and challenges the armed resistance for liberation has emerged and continues to emerge from Palestinian political and intellectual leaders in Israel. Palestinians in Israel emphasized that the brutal events of October 7 are not the way forward. Recently, Dr. Asad Ghanem even wrote an article in the Palestinian Forum, a platform for Palestinian academics and intellectuals from all over the world, in which he questions the armed struggle for liberation. He called for the need to develop a common Palestinian vision and common methods of struggle for all Palestinian groups, while emphasizing the importance of the struggle experience of Palestinian citizens as a cornerstone in building a vision for the Palestinian future. The other Palestinian groups in the West Bank and in the diaspora will, in certain way, accept the moral voice brought by Palestinian citizens of Israel that challenges the armed struggle. They criticize it, but allow it to be within the dialogue space between them. Also due to the discourse of particularity that has been developed within the different Palestinian groups over the last 2 decades. This discourse emphasizes that Palestinian citizens have particularity in their political project within the power relationship with the State of Israel. The recognition of particularity allows Palestinian citizens in the dialogue with other Palestinian groups to insert the Israeli Jew in a complex, non-one-sided narrative lines and not just as an enemy. When Palestinians in Israel engage in discussion with other Palestinian groups regarding strategies to end the occupation, build a future national vision, discussions that I was exposed to some of them during my doctorate research, Palestinian citizens of Israel will present the Israeli Jews not only as enemy as other Palestinian groups might do, but also as partner in the struggle for liberation and equality, as a partner in the homeland. In this way, they can contribute in the long term, I will argue, through the component of their Israeli citizenship to redefining of Palestinian national identity in a way that also includes the Jewish identity. The participation of Palestinian citizens in discussions with other Palestinian groups from the West Bank and the diaspora regarding the construction of Palestinian national vision has been expanding over the past 2 decades for several reasons, but it is still progressing slowly and has not yet become translated into strategies or initiating of political processes. Palestinian citizens of Israel are also obligated to continuously present to the Jewish society in Israel the cruel face of the occupation and the war crimes and the ethnic cleansing committed against their people in Gaza. They are committed to challenge the culture of Jewish supremacy and the fascism that is taking over Jewish collective against them and against all Palestinians, while also expanding partnership with liberal Jews against the war and the occupation to present together an alternative future for both people. It is not easy for Palestinian citizens to raise their voice against the occupation and the war in Gaza and the general atmosphere in Israel with the political persecution of them since October 7. We will pay a price for speaking out boldly. But we don't have the privilege to sit on the sideline and let our anger and fear take control of us without doing anything. We Palestinian citizens of Israel are obligated today to continue believing that partnership and alliances between Jewish and Palestinians in Israel who are fighting to end the occupation and promoting national collective equality for Palestinians and Israelis are the key to advancing peace for both people. And we are the only one among all the other Palestinian groups who can expand these alliances with Jewish society and together break the power-driven messianic discourse that is slowly taking over Jewish consciousness in Israel and which threaten to perpetuate an endless circle of revenge and violence. We are also obligated to inform the various Palestinian groups in the West Bank and the diaspora about the liberal Jewish partners within Israel who carry with them values against the war and the occupation and working to promote national equality for Palestinians. This will help give hope to other Palestinians groups that other future is possible with Israelis. I have another few minutes. 5 minutes I will be. The vision for peace that I am promoting is one that recognizes that the land between the river and the sea is shared homeland of the two people, and that the future of that land must be based on partnership and equality between them, and not separation and supremacy. It promotes self-determination for the two people by having two independent states and a confederation to manage the common affairs of both with freedom of movement and residency. This is the vision of two states, one homeland, a land for all. This vision promises two separate states, but also a partnership in the homeland. In this model, peace will create a third identity of people who share the homeland. This third identity transcends the Palestinian national identity and the Israeli Jewish identity. We need to fill this identity with narratives and shared values to create new meanings for Palestinians and Israelis. This third identity evolves as the two people move between the borders of the states of Palestine and Israel to the borders of the homeland, Palestine, Israel, and build partnership among them. Palestinians in Israel are the only group who currently embody the move to the third identity as they move between the borders of state and the borders of homeland, when they move from Haifa to Ramallah, from Jaffa to Hebron. They move between the two people, blending naturally with them, building partnership and trust relationship with Palestinians in the West Bank and also with Jews in Israel. They are the only group who can embody how a partnership that challenges Jewish supremacy and is built on equality and trust between Palestinians and Jews look like. The models of the shared society organization that have been developed in the last 2 decades between Palestinians and Jews in Israel reflects the envisioning future partnerships in the land for all peace approach. These models should be expanded and translated into political levels, serving as inspiration and guidance for shared model that will be developed between the two people. 1 minute. There are several critical, I am not saying that all Palestinians in Israel have the potential to play this role. There are several critical challenges for this potential role of Palestinian citizens to come to the forefront. One of them is that Palestinian society in Israel today, like other Palestinian groups, is engaged today with the need to remain steadfast in the homeland, repelling the wave of fascism and racism, and are shocked by the level of cruelty against their people. Palestinian citizens are engaged in building resilience against the intensifying regime of silencing and intimidation direct at them. This consumes their energy as individuals and as a society. There is no discourse on themselves as agents for change. Okay, I can finish. Let me just finish. In addition, the Palestinian leadership in Israel is still trapped in the conduct of those who follow the strategies set by leadership in the West Bank and Gaza. Palestinians in Israel need to break free from the role of followers and become dominant leaders in driving political processes that promote ending the occupation and resolving the conflict. This will require them to voice a bold message to the various Palestinian groups, a voice that will challenge, as I said, the strategies of the Palestinian national liberation struggle and the discussion on the collective right of the Jewish in the homeland. This will also require them to voice a bold message to their Jewish partners and articulate the reality in the right language without blurring it through terms that Israel Jews would define. It requires courage to speak about the war crimes occurring in Gaza, which are articulated by many in the world as genocidal war, and about the violence, colonial control over the Palestinians. They need to emphasize to the Jewish partners that if the peace vision that they are promoting together does not place the end of the occupation and the end of the Israeli control over Palestinians as the starting point, it will be difficult to partner in such process that perpetuates Jewish supremacy in the name of promoting peace, and create another circle of violence between the two people. Today, if they partner in such a process, they will pay a price and lose their legitimacy within the various Palestinian groups, which is not what they aspire for. The Palestinian leadership in Israel, along with the Jewish partners and international community, need to incorporate the narrative of moral agent of change in their discourse about Palestinians in Israel when they are talking about solving the conflict. The concept that was ascribed to them in 1990 was a bridge to peace, which the Palestinians eventually rejected because it positioned them as passive player. However, they are part of the conflict and they must be a central player in the resolution. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker is Hassan Kash. He's not here. He's not here. So this is, we can open for now? Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, so what I'm actually going to ask the speakers to come up forward, stand over here, and you can ask questions individuals or to all of them. So come forward. And
Now let me finish it up.
okay, so please identify yourselves and take the microphone. Where's the microphone? Is
The microphone here.
I'm Noran Rupsman from Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I've recently published a book called Peacemaking from Above, Peace from Below. One of the conclusions there is that there are time frames of peacemaking. You can look at short-term approaches, you can look at longer-term approaches. When I hear some of the things that you're putting out on the table right now, I get a little discouraged because you're talking about a peace negotiated between equals, which general I'm in favor of. You talk about a peace of justice, general I'm in favor of. The problem is that peacemaking works effectively in the shorter term if you make peace based on the political realities. So for example, peace between the three powers and West Germany after World War II wasn't negotiated amongst equals. It couldn't have been. And equality and the justice were things that evolved in the aftermath of peacemaking. If you had waited to make peace between equals, you wouldn't have gotten the peace. It wouldn't have been politically feasible. And so the question I guess I want to ask all of you is, how do you square that circle of political realities, which right now after October 7th in particular, but also in terms of the rightward movement of the Israeli population, I don't see that the kind of peace that you're putting forward now, that the common elements of it, are actually feasible in the short run. And so what does that mean for the peace progress? Does that get delayed for the longer term? Is this a long-term, decades-long project? Or do you think about some compromises with political realities to try to achieve something positive and leave justice and leave the thicker elements of this to much later?
Thank you. Do you want to answer now or?
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Rupsman. It's good to see you. It's been a while. I mentioned in the talk that we don't think short term. I mean, I gave what I think is going to be in short term or what I want to see in short term. But resolving the conflict nowadays, I think is going to be far-fetched. So we are not there. I mean, there's a process that we have to undergo, and the process has to involve the rebuild of Gaza, and that's something that is going to take some time. It's a process that is going to involve the PLO and Hamas and maybe other actors, Arab countries, that will seek together some sort of conflict management, or at least some sort of solution for Gaza. And once only this is resolved, then we can go on and see, and hopefully by then we're going to have different leaders, both in Israel and in Palestine, because I put a lot of emphasis, like Dan, I put a lot of emphasis on leaders. If there will be lack of leadership, that is not going to happen. But this nation is in trauma, is in deep trauma. I mean, you travel Jerusalem, and you can't go even one street without seeing the hostages. And to what extent tourists actually understand the underlying vocabulary there, because there is the slogans of freedom for the hostages and finish the war, and then there are the slogans of total victory. And you have to be cognizant of Israeli politics to understand actually it's not the same camp. These are contradictory camps. This country is divided, deeply divided, like the American society in the last elections between Democrats and Republicans. So we have to find the solution, first of all, among ourselves. We have to yield a different leadership out of ourselves. Abu Mazen is not going to survive there forever, so there are going to be new leadership there. Who is going to be the leader, I don't know. And only then, given all these, factors combining together, only then we'll be able to see something different. But whoever thinks that peace is going to come within a year or two, I think is delusional. It's not going to happen. Please, if you want to. Ameer, Fakhira.
Thank you. I have a long answer, but I will choose a very short answer. You're suggesting to us to opt for realpolitik. Just accept the difference in power on the ground, and at least accept it as a beginning point, as a launching point. Okay, let's not make it a hypothetical scenario. Let's take it to the ground. If we accept it, we will get, for example, next year, some kind of a version of the Trump deal. Okay, this is if we accept your hypothesis or your suggestion, Palestinians will have to accept a very degrading version of, I don't know what to say, reconciliation. To be very concise and short, accepting only realpolitik as a criteria got us to the Trump deal. Okay, we have all of the actors acknowledge that they have to be, to a certain degree, to a significant degree, cognizant, aware of the power relations. This is why Palestinians accepted only 22% of their historical homeland, because they are pragmatic. Okay. Now you want them to be more pragmatic and accept some kind of Switzerland cheese that Trump administration had. The problem is not that the weaker part, the Palestinian part, is not pragmatic. The problem is that we want as all conflict, all protracted conflict, and we're talking about a different criteria of conflict. It's not an interstate conflict like in the Second World War. It's an intimate conflict, not a boundary conflict, a communal conflict, not the boundary between empires and states. This is a different kind of conflict. So we need the Israeli public, the Israeli Jews, as quite naturally, the more powerful side to be more pragmatic, not the weaker side to be more pragmatic. So this is a short answer. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a challenging question, and I'm coming from the practical aspect. Actually, I think it's hard to start talk about peace while the war is still going on, and the trauma also for the two people going on, the two collectives. I think in terms of discourse, like the dominant discourse also in the Israeli society and also in the Palestinian society is that this conflict is a zero-sum game. Or we are here or they are there. No also the Palestinians and also the Israeli cannot imagine a different vision. There is a need for a narrative that allow people to move to a different vision, that the vision of revenge and circle of violence. We should present a different narrative in the space. And Palestinians today in the West Bank cannot envision a different future with the Israelis, a future of peace. And I think Palestinians in Israel can envision and can bring together a political vision between Palestinians and Israelis and raise this discourse in the space in a way to break this narrative of a zero-sum game within the Palestinian side and also within the Israeli side, and also use the momentum that is in the international community now that pushing to solve the conflict, and they need people in the ground to present an alternative. And Palestinians and Israel and Palestinian citizens and Jewish citizens in Israel, I think they can offer an alternative that can make a difference for two people.
Let's collect a few questions and so that we can, so 1, 2, go ahead. Please introduce yourselves. This one.
Okay, Avishai Ben Abba. I'm an architect and a member of the Democrat Party in Israel. And listening to all of these wise things that were said here, I believe the first thing that has to be done is to start up a sort of Marshall Plan for Gaza and make Gaza a livable territory for human beings. And that could also be the engine of a beginning process of perhaps reconciliation, perhaps peace. And that kind of Marshall Plan would of course require financial and other help from various local and international institutions, state type of institutions, and the creation of a round table for Gaza, something akin to the European Commission's High Commission for Bosnia, in a sense. Following the Dayton Agreement in 1995, set up of a mechanism with a round table, including, of course, the Palestinian Authority, Israel, the Sunni state in the Middle East, America, and Europe, and also a place around the table for Hamas. This might be surprising to Israelis, but just as it was done in Japan or in Germany following World War II, there has to be also a place for the defeated side or the bad guys, as you want to look at it in this kind of situation. Well, what is your reaction?
My name is Abraham Sela. Thank you, Fakhira, for focusing on the Israeli Arab citizens, because I think it's a very important element, as you said. And I want to ask the question as follows. Assuming that the two-state solution is a reality, is accepted by both sides, what is the perceived nature of the Jewish state or Israel in the eyes of, let's say, the majority of Israeli Arab citizens? I know what the leadership of the Israeli Arab Palestinians has said in the past, at least. But what is the perceived nature of Israel? Is it a state of all its citizens, or is it a Jewish state? And I'm not necessarily speaking about the principle of Jewish. I'm speaking about the practical meaning of a Jewish state. If you will, take the idea of the principle of the law of return as the central element of a Jewish state. So it would be very interesting to see if has there been any change or any development in that context. Thank you.
Okay, one more question, then we'll get some answers.
This is new face. My name is Dhanprasad Pandit from Nepal. Among the 100, there is one Nepali named Bipin Joshi. Okay, you understand what I mean? What is the condition of the hostage more than a year, and will it be possible without showing them up and any peace process? Thank you.
Okay, who wants to go first?
Yes. I will answer about the question about the Jewish state. I think for the Palestinian, for the Palestinian citizen of Israel, the problem with the definition about the Jewish state is the practices of the Jewish supremacy under this definition, and not the terminology itself. Because for us Palestinians in Israel, when you say Jewish state, it says that Palestinians who are not Jewish should be second-class citizens also by the law, and also by the practice of the state, and also the emphasis of the Israelis in the last 20 decades on the Jewish state, while de-legitimizing the Palestinian identity as indigenous. So for me, the problem with the Jewish state is the practices of the supremacy and the inequality for me as indigenous also in my homeland. So I would say that for me, if you want to call it a Jewish state, while it's not giving you more rights than giving me my rights, maybe I won't have a problem with the title. I think Palestinians inside Israel do what they aspire. They want to be in equality as two people, not as individuals. They want collective equality with the Jewish, and they don't want you as a Jewish by law to have rights more than I have, because this state is called a Jewish state. So we can think about in the future about a frame that would call this state a Jewish state and a state of all of citizens, but in a way that ensure also equality and collective equality for me, not as individual, also as a group.
يعطيك العافية. A very short answer and a very, very long answer. Short answer, don't worry. There is already formulas ready for political entrepreneurs just to come in good intent and choose them that can give you an answer. So there's no problem here. I wish we will go back to the point that this was, I remember the days that this was the heated debate between Ruti Gabizo and Hassan Jabarir. I wish to go back to these days. We have formulas for that. The more longer answer, we acknowledge when you go to two states, you are implementing the logic of partition. Ireland 21, Pakistan Hodu 48, Cyprus is not a good example. Okay, so we know under the logic of partition, the two sides will have to acknowledge that the logic of partition will design the states in terms of self-determination. Enough significant part of the intellectual and political elites among Palestinians and others acknowledge that already, that if we're going to divide the homelands or implement some kind of logic of partition, I'm saying partition without espousing the logic of separation. It's not different. It's not similar. It's partition as a Fakhira without separation, okay? Confederated version of two states. So self-determination will be in the two states in Israel. It will be implemented self-determination to the Jewish collective. In a young Palestinian state will be self-determination of Palestinian, and that should not, at least not theoretically, infringe upon the rights of the national minorities in each state, if there will be national minority. Okay, so self-determination is one thing. National collective life as a minority is different things. You know what? Even this Israeli Supreme Court has found in Tibi's decision, for example, a good formulas that can give us a very good starting point and even an end point. I will just end with that. I hope that this will be our problem. We already have solution for it. I really hope that we will this will be the obstacle. If this is the obstacle, we have a solution for it. And just keep in mind that the problem is not in the reality of the structure, is in the structure of reality. Bring Palestinians to the political community in Israel, to coalition governments, and the whole of the, or most of the debate will be theoretical, not practical. So I hope that I've answered the question.
Any other questions? Okay, okay.
I want to ask if they
Wait, introduce yourself and take the microphone.
I'm really asking if you're going to stay for my presentation, because afterwards I would like to talk to you.
Okay. I would love to. Okay. Okay, we have a couple people here, and then we'll have a final round of answers.
I have a very short question to Rafi. I would like to live in a villa. Do I have to move to England in order to live in a villa, or I have a chance to live in a villa while I am staying in Israel? Thank you.
One more.
Of course you can live in a villa.
One more.
Okay, one more. Yes, one more.
Introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Gabriella. I'm a recent high school graduate. I wanted to ask, what is the role of leaders in creating solutions, and it being trickle down, or is it more of a grassroots action? Do we need societies to be demanding and insisting solutions? And if so, how do we encourage people to participate in peace building?
Yeah. I want to just add to Gabriella's question, which I think is a very good question. We have these conditions in which you're asking for pragmatism, in which you're waiting for right conditions and the proper leaders. How do we get there? I mean, the leadership, it's like waiting for Godot on the leadership. So are there any practical ways that we can move things forward?
Well, first I address the issue of the villa. Israel, for better or worse, is a multicultural society. And only among Jews, I think there are about 90 origins, ethnic origins of people and so on, so each one can create his own environment within that. On top of that, we have Arabs who are living among us, 21% nowadays. And between the river and the sea, we're almost equal. Then the same number of Arabs and the same number of Jews. That, of course, include Gaza and the West Bank, the occupied territories. We can continue living in conflict after conflict after conflict, and have an endless cycle of violence. If that's the society that you want to live in, that's not a society that I would like to live in. And that's not a society that I would like any children to live in. I think it is very, very bad for the children. It's maybe good for psychologists, but very bad for children. So that's not the society that I want. So accommodation are needed. And within the villa, we need to accommodate everyone. And as Fakhira said rightly, on equal basis. Not from top and not from below, but on equal, having the same rights and the same liberties as everyone. That's the only way that we can become a functioning democratic and normal society. About leadership. Leadership is a problem not only in Israel. I mean, look around you. Do you see any role model for leader nowadays in the world? Okay, Zelensky maybe one. I used to have one, Merkel in Germany, but she's no longer there. But we have a void in leadership, not only in Israel, but we have a real crisis of leadership. And as long as the populism is going to have a very special role in politics, and it has a very special role in politics nowadays, I'm afraid that we are not going to see very good leaders, and there are not very good incentives for good people to enter into politics. People who want to enter into the muddy water of politics have to think not only twice, but 10 times before putting the foot in, because it's not very nice. It's not very pleasant. It's muddy and dirty, and you know, good people don't survive there for long. Look at politics in Israel. How many good people actually left in the Israeli Knesset nowadays? you can number them maybe in one finger. So it's extremely difficult. I'm sorry, you want to see hope, and in this respect, I'm saying we are not Hussein Bolts here. We are marathon runners. We have to be patient if we want to have peace. It's very easy to go and say, okay, we are going to resort to another cycle of violence. Yeah, okay. And what's next? The only thing that violence breeds is another violence. That's not the solution. So, yeah, patience is for me the thing. Fakhira and Ameer, please.
I will respond about the peace building aspect, but first about leaders. I think it's very important is the discourse of the leaders describing the reality or bringing a envisioning for the future. Because if he talks about reality, there is no movement for action. But if you allow people to think that there is a different future possible, so it will move people for action. And I think most of the leaders today do not take us for envisioning a different future that can mobilize people to take actions for peace or to see that they are able to change reality in both sides. Now, I want to talk about peace building of the civil society. Peace building can be track 1, track 2 from bottom up or top down. And I think civil society in Israel and Palestine also have a role to play in order to promote peace and change the culture of enmity and the dehumanization, and take a role also to prepare the grassroots. But there is a problem now in the peace building field in Israel, Palestine in the last 20 decades, that also more Palestinians left the peace building field because for them it wasn't tackling the root causes of it wasn't promoting ending the occupation and talking about the occupation, and in their mind it was duplicating the same reality of the conflict. So most of the Palestinians from the West Bank left the peace building field. There are still Palestinians from the West Bank in the peace building field, but because it is a weak group, so it cannot move political processes. We need people we need civil society to engage in peace building, but the peace building need to tackle the root causes of the conflict, not duplicate the same reality in which it will have people leave it. We want people to see that the peace building efforts making a difference for their future and the reality, and not in the name of peace building, the occupation continue and the control on Palestinians continue.
Shukran, Fakhira. Thank you, Fakhira. What do we do? First of all, good old politics. We talk to people. And I know a lot of activists doing that on a daily basis, talking to hundreds, if not thousands, of people on a daily basis. So there is always a room for hope if you understand that hope is itself a political resource that we should cultivate and promote. This is so talk to people. People, when talked, I myself am a sociologist, so I tend to talk a lot with people. When they talk, you understand that all people carry with them a very sophisticated theory, a very sophisticated understanding of reality, even if they don't draft it in this academic jargons. Maybe more on the if there is a room for hope. Even now in Israel, there is a robust shared society among the civil society, a robust, wonderful, amazing islands of partnership between Israelis, Jewish and Palestinians, even now. And we are in catastrophic times. You know what? In Israel now, there is one of the most, if I, for example, compare it to Northern Ireland, one of the most robust shared, let's say, partnership islands. If you looked at them, they're some kind of leaping to one possible future that I assume that most of us are invested in. So we have to strengthen these islands and prepare them to become, in one day, our continent. So there is room for hope.
Thank you.